Comparing all leading battery brands after 2 years, nothing outlasts the Energizer from Everready. Nothing outsnaps it. Nothing out-adds.
Hardware hardly says it all.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. It's day 2 of the province-wide strike of the British Columbia Government Employees Union. And what's the score this morning? 38,000 members of the BCGEU out on the picket lines, save and except 1,500 involved in agreed essential services. 6,700 members of the IWA out behind the picket lines. This is about a quarter of the IWA's forest industry force. And the significant thing is that in a place like Williams Lake, the BCGEU has limited its picketing only to the scale shacks on company property, which allows the men to go to work. But in places like Kamloops, the broad BCGEU pickets have put something like 2,000 people out of work in that hard-pressed, highly unemployed town. As you know, I believe the FIR is going for an injunction against that particular action by the BCGEU. But the most startling development yesterday was the ex-parte injunction delivered by Chief Justice Alan McPhail of the Supreme Court of British Columbia, who made it quite clear that while it may only be constructive contempt, it would be contempt to restrict free and unfettered access to the courts, and ordered the pickets removed from every single provincial courthouse and Robson Square and all other courts in British Columbia. In fact, Mr. McPhail said, picketing, which may be lawful in many private, commercial, or institutional settings, has in this case, as its obvious purpose, the limitation and restriction both of the work of the courts and interference with the absolute, free, and unrestricted access of all persons to the courts. It is his further view, said Webster quoting, that such conduct is a contempt of this and every other court. He says, too, that justice cannot be found behind closed doors or picket lines because most important of all, he said, is for the public and media to attend in court to monitor what has happened here. And he says at the end, while he regrets, sadly, the staff are not there, the rule of law has not been suspended in this province. Mr. McPhail's ex-parte injunction from the bench is scheduled to be challenged, I believe, Thursday at 10 a.m. And Labour lawyers are scratching their heads this morning because the Labour Code of British Columbia says a court shall not order an injunction to restrain a person from striking, locking out, or picketing, or from doing an act or thing in respect of, on an ex-parte injunction. And they're saying the BCGEU is on a legal strike. It has the undoubted right to picket its place of employment. Its place of employment for many workers in British Columbia are the courthouses from which they have been ordered removed. And as one Labour lawyer said to me yesterday, is a man doing something illegal? Is a man doing something legal? How can a man doing something legal be in contempt of court? It's a good, clear decision from Mr. Justice, Chief Justice McPhail, and it will be up for challenge as he invited very shortly indeed, probably Thursday at 10 o'clock. Now, what have we got for this morning? First of all, here is the reaction of Cliff Andstein of the BCGEU to the Chief Justice's ex-parte injunction.
There haven't been any changes so far, with the sole exception of the courts, where we're faced with the unprecedented action of an ex-parte injunction granted on the motion of the court itself. I mean, we've had our legal counsel researching it all day, and so far it appears to be without precedent.
Any problems as far as the essential
And
service?
also possibly illegal. It hasn't happened in a decade in this province. Ex parte injunctions granted against picketing. I mean, that's what precipitated events some 10, 11 years ago.
Any problems as far as the essential services?
No, there are no problems as far as essential services go. That's why there have been no hearings at the board, things like that. We were able to work it out quite well.
And a little personal memo to Premier Bennett, in case you haven't read the Globe and Mail this morning, which was read by every conservative financier and moneylender in North America. It is time Mr. Bennett changed his tactics in British Columbia. But on the practical side of today's report to you, we shall be interviewing James Chabot, the Provincial Secretary, under whose aegis comes the two deadly bills 2 and 3. On a lighter note this morning, we're going to find out what a computer wimp is. And I think I can show you a computer wimp. His name is John Bear, and he's going to find out whether or not I am a computer wimp. Also on the program this morning is Dr. Mary McPhail, a delegate for Citizens Freedom Foundation and the Saskatchewan Citizens Against Mind Control. She's had experience with cults, always a matter of great interest in this country, and we'll be talking to Dr. McPhail later on. But first, from Czech Studios in Victoria, James Chabot, the Provincial Secretary of the Government of the Province of British Columbia. Mr. Chabot,
yes.
Is it a simple fact that if you manage to work out a seniority package with the BCGEU today or tomorrow, that you could still, and they could still go for an exemption, taking them right out from under Bill 3?
Yes, that's absolutely correct, and that was the objective that we've been attempting to achieve. If they're concerned about Bill 3, they could apply for an exemption order, providing they have a layoff provision within their collective agreement.
I know that, but you managed not to spell that out very clearly to the unions or the public in the many months in between.
No, I've frequently talked about that exemption order. I know that many trade unionists, the trade union leaders, don't want to talk about that exemption order, because I know for a fact that the majority of the QP locals in British Columbia who are talking about walking off the job, striking illegally and so forth, could apply now, because most of their collective agreements have a provision for layoff, orderly layoff, which would give them an exemption order if they're only to apply.
And of course you're very pleased with the fact that the ferry and marine workers, along with Stu Hudson, have worked out an agreement, right?
Yes, absolutely. And
now, would you
shows that an exemption order can be achieved very, very readily. And that's what we were attempting to do when the Premier, the day before yesterday, suggested to the BCGEU and its bargaining team that they get back to the table for another 2.5 days without the necessity of their members being out there picketing, without the necessity of strike, that they get back together and attempt to resolve this issue of seniority and layoff provisions. And we think that the strike is unnecessary, because we think that 2.5 days was sufficient time for them to resolve that impasse.
All right, let me ask you a couple of very simple questions with very short answers. Are you prepared to give last hired, first fired, seniority within ministries on broad geographic locations?
Yes, we're looking at ministry by ministry seniority rights and units within ministries as well.
All right. Are you prepared to give a transfer rights, say, from Prince George to Vancouver, or a truck driver from Kitwanga to Cranbrook, if he's got a lengthy service?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Now, therefore, another simple short question. Now that the BCGEU are on a properly legal strike under the old contract, correct?
That's correct.
Are you precluded by law from firing anybody until that strike is disposed of, or does Bill 3 take precedence over the Labour Code?
Well, it's my understanding, and the information conveyed to me, that Bill 3 is applicable if the government wishes to use it.
It's been proclaimed, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
It's
law.
So therefore, the fact that they're on a legal strike does not prevent you, if you have to, from using the arbitrary measures under Bill 3.
That's correct. You must remember also that the BCGEU originally, I don't know what their position is now, why they're on strike now, But anyways, they had said that if one person was laid off under the provisions of Bill 3, that they would go on strike. Well, not one person's been laid off under the provisions of Bill 3, and they are on strike.
Just a minute. What you're telling me is not one person has been fired under Bill 3 yet. It's not layoff, it's firing under Bill 3.
That's correct. Terminated.
Terminated. So nobody has yet been fired. How long will that situation stand still for? In other words, will people be fired after Thursday noon, or will they not be fired as long as constructive negotiations are going on?
That's difficult to say at this time, Jack, because that would be a determination of Cabinet. Cabinet will be discussing the ramifications of the strike and the issue as well of the notices of intention of termination that have been issued. Those will be discussed today, this morning, and probably on Thursday as well.
What is your position on minimum service for the application of seniority? In other words, I had mention of 10 years. Is it down to 5, 4, or 3, or what?
You're talking about severance pay?
No, application of seniority. What would be the minimum service under which an employee, were your plans successful, be protected? In other words, would it be 5 years seniority and down that would be fired? That would be laid off under the new language?
Well, I don't want to start negotiating the
but I thought you'd said 10 years.
Now on the air, because that's being negotiated by the parties with some very able mediators. But we want to give strong recognition to seniority. The Act makes reference to seniority. The regulations also identify seniority as being a criteria. But we think that people who have achieved 10 years service with the government should have strong seniority rights.
So that's right. 10 years at least would have strong seniority rights. Mind you, you can't blame the union for panicking in the way you slapped in Bill 2, which I keep saying destroyed a union contract. And it did, didn't it?
Well, Bill 2...
Bill 2.
Bill 2 has had second reading. Bill 2 is in the legislature. It's not passed yet.
In other words, Bill 2, if you come to an agreement now, is quite obviously on the back burner, perhaps forever, if you make an agreement now.
If we make an agreement now, I would have to conclude yes.
All right, and if you don't make an agreement now, sometime within the next few days, you will stop talking about exemptions, and you will then go on your full list of demands in Bill 2, which would give you total control of work schedules, flex time, shift changes, overtime, relocation, etc.
Yes, scheduling, of course, was one of the major provisions of Bill 2, and that was one of the major reasons for its introduction. And hopefully we'll attempt to negotiate those issues at the bargaining table, and if we're successful, of course, Bill 2 is not required.
In other words, if you get the exemption order, Bill 2 is not required. If you negotiate one, you can't negotiate an exemption, you then get down to endless bargaining on all the various provisions which you seek in Bill 2, which remove all what you would call the featherbedding and overstaffing in the civil service. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Featherbedding and overstaffing.
Well, I'm not calling it featherbedding. It certainly would have an impact on overtime and the ability of the government to manage as well. We have some problems with our ability to manage because of the terms and conditions of the collective agreement regarding scheduling and...
That's right. In other words, you and the NDP before you would now plead guilty to being too soft and too generous in your negotiations in the affluent years.
Well, we might have been soft, but I'm not going to plead guilty to that, because many of the conditions that are contained in the collective agreement reached those collective agreements by the way of arbitrations and decisions, arbitrations by arbitrators, and decisions of the Labor Relations Board, and they're matters that have been locked into by outside influences.
One of the things that the union is really fearful of, and properly so, is the fact that your plans would appear to wipe out all grievance procedures and put everything in your hand.
No, we have no intention of wiping out all grievances.
But you're going to simplify them, aren't you?
Yes, we hope to simplify them because they're time-consuming and...
All right. Negotiations again today. You don't go, but you'll get a report after negotiations today and give it to Cabinet tonight or tomorrow, eh?
Yes, we're having a Cabinet meeting today at 9 a.m. Precisely this morning. And I've received a report on the negotiations this morning.
Okay, hold on a second. I'll get that report from you after this break. And I gather, now tell me what happened on the report you got prior to this morning's cabinet meeting.
The report
Briefly.
is fairly minuscule, Jack. There isn't too much to report about the negotiations that took place yesterday. I understand that the negotiations will commence this morning, and they could be ongoing for many hours today. It could be a very long day of bargaining with the mediator, Mr. Vince Reddy.
And you're not very hopeful about it at all, are you?
Well, I'm not going to say today. We have very able mediators involved in these negotiations, and I'm optimistic in view of the fact that we have these good mediators assisting the parties to address the issues.
Do you realize that BCGEU pickets on scaling operations have closed down 6,700 jobs in the forest industry already?
Yes, I think that's most regrettable. I was led to believe that the BCGEU would attempt, would take every effort possible to not disrupt the private sector and its brothers and sisters in the union movement. But it appears there have been some disruptions. I hope they're being addressed.
Well, broadly speaking, we now come to the teachers. The teachers are bound and determined. They have a 57% strike vote to go out on strike Tuesday. And am I correct in saying that there is nothing in the law which prevents them from striking?
Well, the School Act does not allow the teachers to withdraw their services. It's very simple. That's why we have the arbitration system in there for the determination of their salaries.
Arbitration, you've got a wage freeze forever under the CSP.
Now we have the mechanism in place in the various school districts, wherein if the school boards and the teachers of that particular school district are unable to resolve a contract, then it goes to binding arbitration. And the reason why we have binding arbitration is because of the fact that they can't withdraw their services. You have to have these kind of mechanisms in place. So, in other words, they do not have the right to strike.
You will operate, the school boards will operate regardless of striking teachers. Is that your understanding?
Well, I can't say what each and every school board, there are about 70 some odd school boards in British Columbia, and I don't know how each and every school board will react to the partial withdrawal of services by teachers. I'm sure that there'll be substantial teachers going to teach. They will cross the picket line. And I don't know what the reaction of the school boards will be to that.
How long can the government services limp along like this? With essential workers, certainly, yes, in some institutions already, but with a handful of human resource workers handling welfare checks, how long will it be before your apparatus of government crumbles if this is not resolved?
Well, that's difficult to say. I just can't say how long it can carry on. I received a report yesterday morning, my office, talking about the deployment of excluded staff, and a report indicating that there were no emergencies, that everything was working well without the staff being in place. Not as well as if they were there, but nevertheless there were no emergencies.
Are you prepared to come back to the legislature if everything collapses and bring in broad back-to-work orders for laws for all striking civil servants?
Well, I'm not prepared to say that at all. That will be determined in the future. I know that people like Art Kuby and Mike Kramer and BCGEU have indicated, Mr. Andstein of the BCGEU have indicated they're not prepared to adhere to a back-to-work legislation. They won't pay any attention to it. So I think that's very frightening, and I think very astonishing statements coming from union leaders in British Columbia.
Well, Kramer told me on the program yesterday that the advice of the Federation, if that happens, is to defy the laws.
Well, that's regrettable that we have people in British Columbia that would say they're prepared to defy the laws of the province. I'm not suggesting the legislation will be put into place, but nevertheless, to hear these outrageous statements is most regrettable.
So I would presume that even the use of the Essential Services Disputes Act, unless the ferries, for some reason, were to go out, are some considerable way down the road and only after a mishmash of continuing troubles. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would think at the moment that's the way it appears.
Did you know that under the ESDA that the unpaid wages have to go to charity?
I'd have to study the act.
Yeah, I just read the act this morning, Jimmy. Caught you unprepared, but it's quite an ironic and sardonic aside. Now, so where do we stand now? Talks begin again today.
Yes.
You're not going to be optimistic or pessimistic about it, but the government will not back down, will it, Mr. Chabot, on its basic demand that it once again become the boss.
No, that's correct. I think it's important that we be able to manage.
I'm only analyzing what I've learned over the past few months. That is your firm position.
Yes, that's correct. And,
you're going to be the boss.
We're facing a very serious deficit in British Columbia, $1.6 billion, and we must have the ability to cut back on certain programs, certain unessential programs in government, and cut back on the number of employees, because we can no longer afford, the people of British Columbia can no longer afford the services that have crept into the system in better times. These are difficult times right now. Revenue is not flowing to the government as it has in the past.
All right, you spell out to me in my final question what you reckon are the olive branches, if any, that have been laid on the broad package spectrum to make Labour a little happier than they presently are. What's up your sleeve, in other words? Will human rights die on the order paper? Will the rentalsmen die on the order paper because the House is not in session? Is that part of your olive branch?
No, Jack, I can't. You know, those are not pieces of legislation to which I have an involvement. I can't speak for other ministers, and I can't speak for the government on those pieces of legislation. But nevertheless, they have not been passed yet. That's significant in itself. But no, we're proceeding with our legislative program. We've passed those pieces of legislation that had to be passed almost immediately in view of the restraint program we're on.
Well, just let's hope in the final analysis, and I think we can all agree to this, that we don't want to see a couple of 100,000 public sector restraint workers on the streets as well.
No, we certainly don't. We think that it's unnecessary because of the fact that the majority of them could obtain an exemption order merely by application to Mr. Ed Peck, and many of the activities that are suggested to take place, in other words, the strikes that are being suggested, are illegal. I think that the BCGEU strike that's underway now was unnecessary. I think they could have still been at the bargaining table, and the employees of the government still working. So I think that the BCGEU has been given its instructions by the BC Federation of Labour as far as the strike. It wasn't a decision made by the BC Government Employees Union.
But mind you can't blame unions.
The employees are being used as pawns in this game, and that's most regrettable as far as I'm concerned.
But you can't blame trade unionists of long standing for sticking by the principles that they're entitled under the Charter of Rights to free negotiation and free access and release from repressive measures.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, I'll say best of luck to both of you. That's you and the other side. My thanks to James Chabot, Provincial Secretary of the embattled government of the province of British Columbia. And that's the score as of this morning, as lengthy negotiations, begin again today. And if you're a BCGEU striker watching this program, you know now that Jimmy, who wants to be the boss again, almost unfettered, regards you as a pawn in the game. Now, what I want to hear from you in the next segment, if possible, is any specific effect the strike has had on you or your operation or your particular life. We are not making much progress at the moment, and the next big crisis will come, I suppose, Tuesday, if, as and when, the teachers, school board by school board, I suggest, decide whether or not to go out on strike. Calls on a strike situation to Webster after the break. Don't forget, when you're thinking about this situation, that the provincial government is the author of much of its own misunderstandings. Because when they brought in the original Bill 3, it was fire without cause. And it was, I believe, on the urgings, at least from the Employers' Council as well as others, that they amend the brutal firing without cause to firing broadly on the ability to pay. And that's what brought in the amendment which allows unions, if they so wish, to go in now and have their current agreements approved if they have satisfactory termination, recall, and layoff provisions, such as, I keep saying, the IBEW, such as negotiated by the BC Ferry and Marine Workers, which takes them out from under the hammer in the main, although there's always the total wage freeze under the Ed Peck to keep them from getting any more money in this time of undoubted form of crisis. So, and I still stick by my opinion that the government has been extremely clumsy and incompetent in spelling out its package from a way back in July, name of goodness. People are only beginning to understand the stuff now. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a situation here where I was caught in the middle of the Department of Human Resources as an applicant.
Uh-huh.
And my appointment was yesterday, and of course all the offices were picketed, so I couldn't get any assistance. Fortunately, I'm in a place that I can stay, and I imagine there's a lot of other people that are less fortunate than myself, and I'm wondering, when I was working for unemployment insurance and a strike was coming up, they were able to, I don't know, I was told by Grace McCarthy's office that it's the union that has said this is not an essential service. But my understanding with the federal government was it was the federal government that said who's designated employees and what is essential service.
Not as far as the province of BC is concerned. So I understand that most of the local offices are closed, and the only way you can get emergency help is by phoning a regional office.
Yes, I have contacted Victoria and such as that, but there is nothing they can do as far as issuing any financial assistance.
So you will get no welfare check until you're looking for a welfare check?
Yes, it's known as a basic gain application, and I'm caught in the middle because...
So you won't get that, you believe, until the strike is over?
That's right, unless she says in the next few days they come up with emergency assistance somewhere downtown.
Well, I believe they've planned something in the way of emergency assistance downtown, but it probably would be picketed too, I suppose.
I imagine so.
I don't know, ma'am. Thanks for telling me. Go ahead, please.
I think the key question with respect to the exemption clause is to how long it would be enforced, simply because there's a lack of trust on behalf of the union with respect to the government. Their fear is that after 1 year or the length of the contract, 1 year or 2 years, that they will have to go back to the bargaining table again on the basis of an exemption, and then it will be the will of the government whether they will allow that exemption, and that's the concern. I think you should have asked Mr. Chabot, would he consider applying the exemption clause for the length of the contract and on personal agreement to the extension or the length of his government, and then you might have an agreement. That's the whole issue. How long will the exemption clause take effect?
I would have thought that would be, maybe I'm stupid, but I would thought that would be implicit at least for the length of the contract.
Yes, it would be. It would be, but that's their concern. They would then have to negotiate. They would then have to negotiate after the contract for exemption again, 1 year, 2 years, or whatever.
No, I don't think that's
their concern.
Okay, you're a union member.
No, I'm not.
Much obliged.
Thank you.
Bye. Go ahead, please.
Jack.
Yeah.
This strike is one of the best things that the BCGEU has ever done because of the public. All the employees in that union are wondering whether they got jobs or not. And for Jim Chabot this morning saying that it's an unreasonable thing to be on strike, it's the most reasonable thing to be on strike because they negotiated for 6 months last year and never got nowhere with the government.
Well, it's quite obvious that if a more finite seniority package had been offered in the beginning, it would have had the very practical effect of splitting the members of the BCGEU. They didn't even think of that.
Well, I don't think they would have split the BCGEU.
Well, maybe they wouldn't. Much obliged. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, to do with the exemption agreement, the government says that we have to have some existing language in the contract. Well, under Master Agreement Section 1301, there is existing language to cover this exemption agreement for employees.
It's not satisfactory to the government, quite obviously. Yeah. You're talking about the BCGEU master contract.
Master agreement of the BCGEU.
Well, that's the whole object of the exercise of Bill 2, is to end the contract and strip out especially the seniority provisions as presently operated in the government.
Yes, we understand.
And under the regulations, one of the bad things in the regulations is that a department manager could nominate any group as a group. In other words, 1 person, 3 people, 10 people. And that, of course, would have enabled them to prepare hit lists for firings.
That's right. This whole strike amounts to the fact that the government wants to break the BCGEU.
I don't think that that's stupid. They want to cut back their powers. You can't break the BCGEU as such in British Columbia in 1983, and at the same time, you can't win a general strike here or anywhere else in our kind of society.
No, I realize that.
I mean, talking of a general strike is bone stupid as far as I'm concerned, as of this moment. Right?
Right.
Thank you. Seashelt.
Yes, sir. What can we do now that the Human Resources is on strike? Who can we get a hold of, and so on and so forth, for support?
Are you stuck for a welfare check?
Yes, sir.
How long have you been without one?
Well, I had an appointment this morning, and now I don't have an appointment.
Many kids you got?
None, sir.
So you're single?
Yes, sir.
I have to phone the regional office, and they're talking about setting up an emergency office in downtown Vancouver. Is that where you live?
I live in Seafield, sir. And I phone Vancouver then, eh?
You have to, yeah, the regional office in Vancouver. From Victoria, go ahead, please.
Yes, I think what people have to understand that being in a strike situation, no one likes it, but sometimes it is something which we are forced to do. I'm at the point where I'm tired of hearing the Premier. I'm tired of hearing Jimmy Chabot on the news broadcast coming across with the sentimental dribble. They are the ones that created this. They are the ones that are ignoring a collective agreement. And I think they're going to have to stop and really do some hard thinking if they're capable of that. For people who are having problems getting their checks, who are having problems, I suggest that they call the MLAs that they elected.
Good idea, ma'am.
This is over in Coquitlam, and I have the Premier's phone number here. It's 387-1715.
That's his office number. Thank you. Hope I don't have to try to get through today. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, I'm just going to say that I'm really upset with this whole thing, restraint and strikes and everything like that. I put applications into the BCGEU, and I've had them all put on hold just because of all this coming up. And
Applications for what?
For jobs. I've got trades within that I could use within the BCGEU.
You're a dreamer.
Well, I quit a regular job, Jack, in February to work with teens in the system, and my job is down the tube. My house is down the tube. My car is about to go down the tube, and I've been out looking for jobs. I've put out resumes. I've put out over 300 applications and resumes.
With all these IWA guys down, the consumer spending will have dropped even sharper as of today.
I know,
it's a damnable situation.
I haven't been unemployed for 20 years, Jack, and I just can't believe it.
All I can say is the best of luck. I'm going to do another segment of phone calls after the break. Maybe you could, and then I'll do it. Where am I? I'm back on the air. Phones. What do you think of Chabot? What do you think of Bennett? What do you think of Cuby? What do you think of Kramer? What do you think of anything? If you can think at all. Go ahead, please.
Hi there. I'm from North Vancouver, and I'm all for the strike. One thing I'd like to mention is that Bill Bennett's commercial he has about the BC Transit.
Yeah.
He's making it look like they say they're trying to create jobs in BC, and here they are trying to fire all these government employee unions.
Yeah, that particular commercial is a little bit ironic, sadly ironic this morning, is it not?
And another thing about that commercial, they're trying to make it look like as if those trains are being built in British Columbia. First off, they're all being built back east, and they're being sent into British Columbia.
Fair enough, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
I'm a student, and I'm just wondering how long the strike will have to go on until they wipe out this semester or so.
Which semester?
I'm presently attending Douglas College, and I need the credits to get into SFU.
And you're picketed, are you?
Not yet, we're not, but our teachers were saying that if the strike goes on for over 2 weeks, we might lose our entire credits for this semester so far.
You're just an unavoidable casualty on the sidelines, that's all.
Could be.
Can only give you sympathy. I can't give you any encouragement. Go ahead, please.
Yes, both my wife and I are government workers, and we were both laid off.
What do you mean laid off?
Well, as of yesterday, we never got letters saying that we were going to be given a second chance type.
You were fired.
We were fired.
Well, what's his name? Chabot says this morning not one single worker has been fired.
Well,
so therefore you are, if you wish to be on strike, you have not yet been fired.
Mr. Bennett never ever gave us a letter that he said on Monday was issued.
You have not been fired. If Chabot tells me that, technically speaking, he is correct.
Oh, I don't have a job then.
Fair enough, boy. Are you on the picket line?
Yes, I am. I have no other choice to make $75, you know, like.
Fair enough. Both of you working. What were you taking home, the pair of you, when you were working?
About $2,000 a month clear.
Each?
No, to get, yeah, each, sorry.
Each. Hold on, will you, please? Okay. All right. Next one. Victoria, go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
There's one little thing that makes me kind of peeved. You know, there's a little island on the Fraser there with some farmers. And there's this dairy farmer that he's going to have to pour his milk down the drain, and then there's that greenhouse fellow that can't get rid of his stuff.
Which island on the Fraser? You're talking about the North Arm?
Yeah.
Barnston Island.
You know, pardon?
Barnston Island.
I think that's the name of it. It's got the government, the little government ferry runs back and forth.
Oh, you're talking about the Albion ferry? No, the Barnston ferry.
Yeah, the Barnston.
Who told you he was going to pour his milk?
They've been down for, there's a dairy farmer up there that he hadn't been able to ship his milk out since this thing was pulled off yesterday.
Hold on, we'll get some details. The news hour might want to look at it. From Terrace, please, go ahead.
Yes, Jack. I'm in full support of the strike that's going on now. I only wish that they would shut the whole province down.
Oh, come off it.
Oh, come on. Look, we've got a soup kitchen here. We're feeding 84 people a day. People are living under plastic at the railroad tracks. You know, people are really suffering. And unless, Hitler took the human rights away in 1934, and we've got the same thing happening here in British Columbia.
What do you mean, people? You're talking about Tumbler Ridge, or are you talking about Terrace?
Pardon?
You're talking about Terrace, BC.
I'm talking about Terrace. The whole province is having a lot of trouble. And
all right.
We're going to go ahead and sit back and take this. We have to speak up, Jack, and we have to get something done.
Okay, hold on, will you, please? I want to get your phone number later. Do you want to go on the air?
Yeah, okay, Jack.
Carry on. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, Jack.
1244.
Yeah, Jack, it's Bob Peacock from the Ferry Workers Union.
Oh, hello, Bob.
How you doing?
I didn't recognize your voice. I didn't recognize your name. You're happy with the new agreement?
No, not at all.
You're going to recommend acceptance?
No.
You're from the Horseshoe Bay Terminal?
That's right.
You object to the 8-hour day?
Not just the 8-hour day, the whole damn thing.
Mind you had it pretty good before, didn't you?
It wasn't bad.
And taking away your half-hour paid meal break, and there'll be no more cash overtime.
No, that's not quite true, Jack. They're not taking away the paid meal break. But what they are doing is bringing in an 8-hour day. And like I said, like I've told you before when I've taught you, that I'm not against the 8-hour day, but it's a 12.5% reduction immediately prior to even looking at the agreement.
12.5% reduction in what?
Over the year. Catering attendants will lose $2,400 to $2,500.
You mean they won't get their overtime?
That's right. There'll be no overtime.
In other words, without their overtime, the wages will drop 12.5%.
That's right.
$2,400 a year.
That's right.
Well, but wasn't the ferry strangling itself on overtime?
The employer has the right to schedule, Jack.
You don't get an awful lot of sympathy from people these days.
Oh, I'm not worried about that. What I'm basically saying is that we don't want the overtime anyway. Really. But
well, if you don't want the overtime, you don't get the extra 12.5%, so what are you complaining about?
No, I'm not complaining about that at all. What I'm saying is that in the proposed agreement that we have here now, and with the exemption and what's happening with the public concept of the ferry workers and what Cliff Andstein and Jack Adams and the BCGEU and other unions throughout the province have stated about us.
Yeah, I see. But you've got clean seniority on this now, haven't you?
No. There's no seniority. The seniority clause is wiped right out.
Now, don't exaggerate, Bob.
Oh, it's wiped. It's gone. It's gone.
Well, can you give me a copy of the agreement?
I certainly will.
Well, let me have it then. Sitting here.
I'll send it to you. There's no doubt about it.
No, give me your phone number off the air and we'll pick it up from you.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. Don't go away. Very fond of little brown paper envelopes. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. I'm a BCGEU member, and I've been on the picket lines. And there's one point I would like you to ask Mr. Chabot.
Okay.
They've changed the language of this layoff and recall. And what they said was that they would lay people off,
phone numbers.
but the government also wanted to determine merit when people were
Under the Public Service Staff Relation Act, merit and ability has always been up there alongside seniority.
Okay, who determines the merit? And Jack, you have film. When you're speaking of merit, you have film of our cabinet members sleeping in Victoria.
You're talking about the Sleeping Beauties?
Yeah, Sleeping Beauties, Bennett's Bandits themselves.
Well, don't forget, if you're running 24 hours a day, more or less, and using closure like a guillotine, you're bound to fall asleep sometime. It was the Cuddly Bear I objected to more than the Sleeping Beauties.
There's one other thing, Jack. Bennett, when he was in Toronto, said that if he called an election at this time, not only would he get back in, he would gain more seats. I challenge Mr. Bennett to call an election now.
That's just silly, of course, isn't it?
And the students, I feel sorry for the students, especially the fellow at Simon Fraser wants to get into...
Listen, the trouble has only begun, my dear.
There's no jobs anyways.
No, thank you. We're going to leave the provincial government labour situation for the moment and try and at least have a laugh in the next segment with a guy called Johnny Bear about computers. After the break. After the break. John Bear is from Berkeley, California, but don't hold that against him. Please don't. And he has written a book called Computer Wimp. You are a computer wimp.
I have been one for 10 years, yes.
I, therefore, ipso facto, am a computer wimp. Describe me.
You're an innocent victim. You think that computers, you're being barraged all the time by people telling you your life can't be happy or complete without computers, and yet somehow you feel deep down inside, maybe you don't really need one of your own.
Do I need a computer? Why would I want a bleeding computer?
Well, because all these marketing people are telling you that your life is somehow unsatisfactory if you can't keep your Christmas card list on one and your wife's recipes and your inventory of your books and your neckties and all these things that computers do so wonderfully.
You've convinced me I must get a computer at once.
Well, no,
I must
please.
have an inventory of my ties. I've got 4 or 5 all soup stained. I must have an inventory of my Christmas cards, which I don't send anymore. I must have an inventory of what else? My wife's recipes. She knows them off all by heart. If she doesn't know it, she ain't going to read a recipe, is she?
Absolutely. I used to think I was the only person in North America who thought we were not having a computer revolution. Now I see there's another enlistee in the revolution.
Oh, I mean, I'm an automatic enlistee. I wouldn't
Good.
buy a computer if you gave me one for free, to put it in an Irish form of words. Now, tell me your bad experiences. First of all, who are the people who are now flogging computers?
Well, there are 150 companies out there
The
making
big names.
Well, IBM, Apple, Radio Shack.
The big name individuals whom I see in commercials.
Oh, well, Dick Cavett and... Well,
Dick Cavett.
Alan Alda, George Plimpton.
Sincere.
Yeah, Bill Cosby is out of a job now because Texas Instruments went out of the small computer business this week, so...
So because Cosby or Alda or Cavett or some other sincere television or Hollywood star says buy a computer, I suppose hundreds of thousands are rushing out to buy them.
Millions of people are. Then they get them home and they can't figure out what to do with them. They end up as these $4,000 doorstops or bookends.
Full of technobabble, I believe, is one of your phrases.
Right. That's what when you walk into a computer store, one of the first things they say, well, what kind of baud rate do you had in mind? And do you want 5-inch or 8-inch discs and floppies or a hard disk and all this technical stuff. All you want, at best, you want a computer to play games with, maybe to do a few household things, but not...
Tell me some of your own personal experiences with computers which turned you into such an incredible cynic, Johnny.
Well, I've got to say that I wrote this book on a computer. There are certain things they do well. There are things I like, but one of the first things I learned with my first computer, which was a mere $35,000...
How much?
$35,000 and as big as your desk here. That was when I learned that you should never buy anything you can't lift, because repair people rarely come to you. You've got to carry the thing back, and there I am staggering up the 2 flights of stairs with this gigantic thing in my arms. Now at least they've gotten smaller, but still incredibly complex.
You paid $35,000 for a computer? How many years ago?
That was 10 years ago. The same thing would cost maybe $3,000 now. But computers then and now come with this incredible 12-week warranty. I mean, can you believe it? You buy a computer, it's guaranteed for 12 weeks, and at the end of that, you're on your own. Now, would anybody ever buy a car if it came with a 12-week warranty? It's just insane to me that the industry has so little confidence in its
therefore,
products.
you've got to buy a repair contract with the computer.
If you can find somebody who will do it. I mean, it's not like your car where you take it into the neighborhood garage to get it fixed. The thing has to be sent back to Southern California or to Hong Kong or Korea. There are some stores that can fix some things, but by and large, it's awfully hard to get an extended
You
warranty.
started out at $35,000. What did your latest computer cost you? $3,000?
It cost me about $1,000.
$1,000?
That's for the basic computer, but then you've got this razor and blade phenomenon.
A
Which,
what?
The razor and blade thing. You buy the razor for $2, but then you're buying the razor blades the rest of your life. You start with a $1,000 computer, and then you have the $500 disk drive, and then you have another one, and then you have the $800 printer and the telephone connect. By the time you're finished, you'll spend 4 or 5 times what the sticker price.
Think of all the nonsense we've been peddling over these years. The impression will be that we shall sit at home, not have to go out the house, we'll punch up the grocery store, examine the specials, the order will be received, maintained, charged, and delivered to your house.
It's very enlightening to go back and read the technology magazines, Popular Science and that kind of thing from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the cashless checklist society and the picture phones and all this stuff. It hasn't quite arrived yet, and I kind of think it never will.
It's a bunch of garbage.
For most people, in most situations, yeah.
And the purpose of your book, I presume, is to make sure that people do not buy computers.
That most people don't. That at least what most people do is buy the computer and then they go home and try to figure out what to do with it. All I suggest is you do the reverse. First you figure out, do you need one? Is there anything you can do with it? And if so, then go out and buy one. And when you do that, don't spend $3,000, $4,000. You can buy good things for $200, $300. You can rent them, you can lease them, you can borrow them. Find out, and 9 out of 10 people will discover they didn't want one after all.
I could, I suppose, if I were an organized person and fairly financially literate, keep my accounts and my income tax and whatnot.
It, by all accounts, would take you about 100 hours to get good enough to do something that would save you 5 hours a year. So in 20 years, you'll have broken even.
Give me that again.
It might take you 100 hours to learn to get really good with this income tax or account keeping program. And what it'll end up doing is saving you maybe 5 hours a year on your taxes or on your record keeping. So you've spent 100 hours, you're saving 5 hours a year. In 20 years, you've broken
So
even.
the whole computer industry, as far as the man on the street concerned, is a snare, a delusion, and a sham?
Well, the consumers are starting to point that out by their behavior. Companies going out of business, stocks plunging. Yeah, I think the revolution is...
Video games dying on the vine?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Well, give it some more good news.
Well, IBM introduced its long-awaited Peanut yesterday. They're fighting against the tide.
What's a Peanut?
A Peanut is a $700, they say, IBM machine. Of course, by the time you get the added memory and the added gadgets and whatever, you're still up to maybe $3,000. But this is still a tiny little part of IBM's business. So some of these companies, Apple and Radio Shack, are betting the whole companies that people will buy these $1,000 things. But
and here are you destroying their image altogether.
To the best of my
At
ability.
least in your book, though. One day I might write a book. I don't know if I can stay awake long enough, but might write a book so therefore I can get my $700 computer.
Well, you least of all need one. I mean, I see you sitting here taking shorthand. That's amazing. Very few people who are male and over 21 know how to do shorthand. You don't need a computer.
What are you suggesting? I learned shorthand as a newspaper reporter.
Well, good for you. And
I'm a chauvinist pig who resents any resemblance to a female secretary as such.
Then what do you need a computer that will get you up to 40, 50 words a minute faster than you go right now?
I don't know if anybody wants to talk to John Baer or not. Do you think they do? No. Let's hear about unhappy experiences with computers with John Baer, who is a professional computer wimp. We'll match after the break. John Baer, Wimp Computer. Go ahead to this incredible fellow.
Morning, Jeff. I don't think he's incredible. I'm completely against everything he said so far. Jack, if you're going to write a book, I can think of nothing better for you to write it on than a computer. I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I bought, I won't mention names, but I bought a 64K computer.
I don't mind.
Okay, I bought a Commodore 64. It cost me under $1,000, and...
Commodore 64?
Yeah, I adore it. I've got to admit, it's fantastic. I've transferred my budget onto it. I do graphics and logos. I'm now using the graphics section to design signs before I do them.
You're a sign writer?
No, an airbrush artist. I bought the computer for the idea of getting into graphics and designing my own games.
Okay, knock him down, knock him down. John, listen to what John has to say to you, you fool.
You bought it a few weeks ago.
Yep.
And it came with this glorious 12-week warranty?
Yeah, okay, well, the warranty, well, I wasn't too happy about. But, I mean, how much can go wrong in a solid-state chip?
About 140,000 things, because that's how many little parts there are in a chip, and every single one of them is fragile. These things are so much more fragile than any manufacturer would ever have you believe.
Sure, oh, I know that, but look, what does the whole chip cost to replace? Maybe $15, $16 for your most expensive?
$15 to replace it, and about $200 in the repairman's time to find the one that went wrong. I have been through this many times.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I like you. You're destructive. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
I didn't realize it was I.
It is you.
Thank you. Mr. Baer, what I think is one of the most insidious things about the so-called computer revolution is the way in which the advertisements are being pitched to parents And the idea being that if you do not buy a computer for your children, they will be at an almost unconquerable disadvantage.
Excellent question.
Right.
Answer.
Right. Yeah, they say if you don't learn programming, you won't make it in the world of tomorrow. It's about as useful as learning to fix the transmission of your car. Maybe one person in 1,000 really needs to know how to do it. Everybody else, we're going to go to those people for their expert advice.
So children do not need to learn programming in computer software?
Children don't, adults don't. No.
Don't need to?
No, not at all.
And therefore, don't be put in a position of being a snob forced to buy a computer for your child.
But look at the clever thing that Apple did. They've given a computer to almost every school in North America, so the children are learning to use them in school and coming home and saying, I want an Apple just like I have in school.
It's an Apple for the student, not an Apple for the teacher.
Right you are.
Thank you, ma'am. A good call. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to agree with some of the things this chap has to say and disagree. I think that he's right in saying that hundreds of people are buying computers that really don't need them. And the ones that do need them seem to be buying, well, it's sort of like when they need a pickup, they go out and buy a Cadillac or a Semi. They buy way more than they need. But for the kids, I think there ought to be an alternative where the children can come into contact with computers and become computer literate to the point of not being afraid of them.
Okay, what's your answer to that?
There's nothing wrong with that, and they can do it in schools, they can do it in public libraries that are putting in coin-operated computers, so for $1 you get 20 minutes worth of time. I mean, that's the way to learn it, not buying a $3,000 thing, taking it home and ending up with a doorstop or a bookend.
But with these horrible little video screens that we're going to finish up with generations to come of bifocal children.
We very well may. The flickering screen is even supposed to bring on epileptic fits in some people, too.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I'd like to congratulate your guest on finally somebody coming out and saying that you don't need a home computer. I've been in the computer field for about 14 years now, and I would never buy a home computer because I don't need it at home, and I never will.
Good for you.
Not until they come out with things that are more useful for the people at home.
Can't imagine what use there could be.
Well, if a person is interested in, say, in the stock market, you can get direct telephone access to the stock exchange.
That's a good use.
That is a good use.
That's one of the very few. Tapping into these giant databases where you can plug into some public library or newspaper files, and it's growing. That'll come in the next 10, 15 years.
And every time you phone somebody's research library, they charge you a fee.
Right, and you're paying $5 to $20 an hour for the privilege. And also tapping into the out-of-town newspapers, as one person said, why do I want to read a newspaper in Saskatoon or something? I'm here, so...
the last thing I want to do is read a newspaper in Saskatoon.
Even over your video monitor.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I would just like to know, I've been considering picking up a computer for home with the kids and so forth. What would be probably the best computer to have?
You didn't set this one up for me.
No, I didn't, and I don't think you should plug anybody after your negative attitude.
Well, no, something under $300 if you've got to do something, but I'd surely start out recommending that you rent one, you lease one, you spend a few weeks borrowing one, do something to discover whether or not you really want one, and then if by some chance you think you do, spend under $300. You can get the Commodore, the Atari, the Mattel, the smallest Radio Shack. There are things under $300. Why spend $3,000 when you can do it for $300?
Go ahead from Revelstoke.
Hello, I'm wondering about our guest's suggestion for what computers should be used for in schools and how school boards can best get the best kind of advice about what to buy, what to put in what to include in the curriculum. Because at the moment, there is no guideline from our Ministry of Education regarding this whole area, and I think a lot of school boards are going ahead on their own.
Okay, we've got your question. Here's the answer.
Yes.
Okay, well, start with my book, of course, but after that, the University of Illinois has put out this incredible stuff called the Plato. It stands for something, can't remember what. The Plato programs, and those are the best educational programs that anyone's ever done. Most computer education, they show you a picture of a map on the screen and say, okay, where's Vancouver, where's Toronto? Stuff you could do with a 5-cent piece of paper just as well. But if you look into what the University of Illinois is doing, that in all of North America, that has become the center of good computer education.
Thank you. But it is not one of the great fields of endeavors for bright youngsters, computer crime. Now, is it not?
Yes.
I mean, if you're really sharp, you can tap into a bank, whatever, and transfer money to your own account for every odd cent.
Right, the people who do it, who take 10 cents out of each of a million accounts and nobody ever notices it.
And is that being done?
Oh, far more than anyone would ever believe, because most of them are so clever they'll never get caught. I interviewed a man in prison a couple of months ago who had taken $51 million from one of the largest banks. They thought he only took $1 million, but he actually showed me his Swiss bank account. He took $51 million. And the bank will never know it because he took it out of this account and then puts it in that one. And every time the auditor comes through, the money is juggled around and they don't know what's going on.
Was he in the bank when he did it?
Yeah, he was in charge of their computer room. But he was being paid a very small salary, and he figured, well, 51 million, he got it all out into Switzerland.
But tell me, does nobody know that? He programs 100 accounts, and he says, every odd $10 transfer to my account, which will transfer it to Switzerland.
Right. But every time the auditor comes through, it takes $10 out of somebody else's account and puts it back in that one. For that few seconds, the auditor is looking at that account. Then it takes that out of the next account and just shuffles it down the line. I mean, things that you could never do with pencil and paper, you can do with the electrons floating through the air.
Wonderful for criminals.
There's one of the good uses.
One of the really good uses for criminals.
Right.
It makes Al Capone and all these people look like two-bit pikers.
And they don't get sentenced to very much. This guy who stole 51 million had a 3-year sentence. If he had walked in with a gun and stolen $1,000, he'd probably get life in prison.
Now, there's a good, admirable, especially for young Americans, you know, the Horatio Alger.
Right.
I mean, that's really, you could make a lot of money consulting on how to steal from banks.
And never have to leave your home, because you can do it all over the telephone lines.
You mean you don't have to be in the bank to steal?
Oh, absolutely not. No, you do it over the phones.
Can I break into anybody's computer?
Not the little home computers, but any business that has their computers connected to the branch offices and things over the telephone lines, yes. Yeah, because every time they figure a better way to keep people from breaking in, the criminals, and most of these criminals are teenagers who are just doing it for fun, they figure the way to break in.
Because some of Americans' legion of friendly countries around the nation, I hate to ask this question, break into the penthouse computers and set off a bomb?
You don't think the situation in Grenada was really done by the Pentagon? It was probably done by some teenagers in New Jersey.
Kelowna.
Hi.
Hi.
The question I have is I'm a parent, and I've got, my kids just going into school, and of course, as you said, they've got Apple computers, and they're saying that, it's going to be really beneficial for us to have them. Now, I've got a couple of friends already that have gone out and bought the $3,000 things, and they're working on us. Now, are you saying that, in order to keep up with our child's education and not to be parents that aren't going to be keeping up, that we won't need a computer in the home for our child?
Almost certainly not. The computers are going to get built into things. You've got one now in your telephone, in your television, in microwave ovens, that kind of thing. What you probably want to do is go to one of those friends who has one and who is probably using it at best 10, 15 hours a week.
Well, they're taking lessons, so they don't know how to run it, eh? They're all taking all these lessons everywhere.
Okay. What you probably want to do then is make a deal with one of these friends, borrow their computer for a weekend or borrow it for half a day over a period of a couple of weeks, and that's the best way to figure out that you probably won't need one. Just look at the 400- or 500-page manual that comes with them, and that alone will probably convince you.
I mean, that put you off right away.
Can you imagine? I mean, suppose you had to buy a car and it came with a manual 3 inches thick. It's, they're hard to learn. They're warranted for such a short time. They're hard to get fixed.
You realize you may have destroyed legions of computer sales in Western Canada this morning?
He's already convinced me that we don't need to go out and spend this money for one.
$3,000?
Yeah.
And your husband about to be out on strike?
No, no, he's not, but I will be, and I'm the only one working, so I'm not too impressed either. The only thing I have then is that, if they're really, they're going full force in the schools now, isn't it going to work so that we're going to end up needing this to keep up with what our kids are learning?
No, not at all. What are the kids learning? A few of them may learn programming, and there's no need for a parent to keep up with that because you're never going to need it for yourself. And the ones who are learning school stuff, that's fine. If they learn geometry or history better on a computer than from a teacher, more power to them. But
let the school do that.
Yeah, right.
See, what they're doing is convincing us that unless we learn how to run these computers or get one ourselves, we're not going to be able to keep up with what our kids are.
No, that's John Baer, not Webster. John Baer says that's sales-type garbage of which you should take no notice. Is that correct, John Baer?
Right, you are.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
My thanks to John Baer.
Thank you.
A veritable delight, which is unusual for some authors, but this morning you've been bright.
Oh.
May I compliment you?
Thank you very much.
How much is your bleeding book?
I don't know in Canada. It's $10 down there.
$10 times 20% is 515.
$12.
$12, eh?
Sounds reasonable.
See, I don't even need a computer to work that out.
That's fantastic.
Thank you, John Baer. Best thought. Stay there for the moment, or you'll rip out our computers.
Oh, my God.
After the break, Dr. Mary McPhail. Haven't done much about cults or brainwashing or mind control for some time, but with me this morning is Dr. Mary McPhail. She's a medical doctor. who belongs to an organization called SCAMP. What does that mean?
Saskatchewan Citizens Against Mind Control.
And you're a delegate to CFF. What's that?
That's the Citizens Freedom Foundation.
And you've just come back from a conference in California, I believe, in Los Angeles, on the Citizens Freedom Foundation. What were you trying to do down there?
Well, it's the largest in the world organization of parents and concerned people about cults. And it was a very intense conference. There were very many areas covered. Part that interested me the most, perhaps, was the focus, F-O-C-U-S. And I'm sorry, Jock, I don't know what that stands for, except it includes people who have been in cults and exited.
Now, why exited? You mean got clear?
That's right.
Were hauled out forcibly, perhaps, and deprogrammed?
Some of them were deprogrammed. Most of them were deprogrammed. Some came out on their own.
Now, why are you, Dr. Mary McPhail, caring about cults at all?
Well,
I mean, apart from the fact that people like myself kind of object to techniques used, but when people are free and over 21, they can join whatever the devil they like, can't they?
I think that is the popular misconception. And at the moment, I would say, in the 80s still, in the world, not only in Canada, only people who have been touched personally are really very concerned about this, and that's a shame.
Were your daughters involved with the Moonies or some such organization?
My daughters got involved with a group called Baba Free John, Daw Free John. There are other names that he keeps adding to. Free Communion Church is one. And we didn't know there was such an organization, nor did they. You see, we knew nothing about cults when they got involved.
Well, in what way did how old are your daughters now?
Well, they are in their 20s.
And are they still connected with Baba Free John? The Free Communion Church?
Right.
Is this in Saskatchewan?
He's a fellow who started in Brooklyn, I believe. He went to India and proclaimed himself a guru and got followers called devotees, and now they pray to him and go prostrate in front of his image.
And where does Baba Free John operate?
I think his headquarters are somewhere in California and perhaps Hawaii, but he has representatives all over the world. And you had some
are there any Baba Free John
communities here in Vancouver, and now I would say that my daughters are exiting. My daughter's married, the one that is living in Surrey here. They are now living in their own home. They are not in a commune any longer. But to get out of a cult means a lot more than that. You must leave it psychologically, and that is another thing.
No, but this Baba Free John organization, which you say is up and down the coast, I never happened to have heard of it myself before. It's commune-style living in the old 70s way? How many would you live?
It can be. It needn't be. You can do it by correspondence. You can live in separate homes.
Is it not? It sounds kind of harmless to me. Convince me it's not harmless.
You see, there are thousands of cults, and all of them have a harmless front.
But you take the likes of the Moonies, of course, and they have this lovely technique of inviting people to join the family, taking them to dinner, and then feeding them peanut butter and putting them in the back of pickup trucks to go and sell candies for the greater glory of Mooney, wherever he is now. Are you suggesting your people, this Baba Free John, is the same kind of organization?
Well, what
collecting millions from people?
I think so, because people donate to him once they get involved. And we personally know of one family that has donated $100,000, $200,000 to this man.
And what way does
it is a mind control organization, because they make children, excuse me, make children out of the adults, and they program
What are their
them.
brainwashing techniques then, if you would call them that?
Well, like most cults, they go into a love bombing, to start with.
Oh,
They
yes.
make them very welcome.
The old love bombing.
They have this leader who is a very charismatic person whom they will describe as having these magical powers or whatever. I am not going to necessarily describe this particular cult because there may be things I don't know about it, and there are very many things I don't know about it. Some people would not even call them a cult. For instance, when they call themselves a Free Communion church, then some people are calling them a church, you see. And then
well, in the Baba Free John, do they tithe their wages?
Then they yes, they do, I think. But they have other ways. They sell them books. They sell them magazines. They have regular meetings. But that is for reinforcement only. See, initially, they will give them the love bombing, and they will have the group encounter things. They will show them, say, a marriage ceremony or something like that. And then they will ease them very cleverly into a marriage or something like that. Then they will tell them how the world is evil and how we don't have the answers. And then they will sell them a carrot that's perfect, you see. And
simplistic, simple-minded, entrapment, you would say, mental entrapment, talking
Yes.
about all these cults
If you are
of people who have
idealistic,
lost their way in life.
it sounds very...
Okay, Mary McPhail, you're going back to Saskatchewan now, and you're going to still fight through the Saskatchewan citizens against mind control.
Yes, I'm going to write an article in a newspaper. And while I was in Los Angeles, I interviewed the man who started the anti-cult movement in Germany.
Klaus Karki. I'm
Karki,
sure your
yes.
information will come in very handy, Mary McPhail. I'm glad you took the time to stop in and see me this morning, and we've learned something we didn't know before, and who knows, we might come across Baba Da Free John one day. My thanks to Mary
Thank you
McPhail
very
of Scamp in North Battleford, Saskatchewan. I'll be back with a free-for-all after the break. There is an emergency human resources office for this area in the Italian Cultural Centre on Slocan. Telephone number, I hope this is the right number, 668-3111. I'm just going to have a free-for-all to the end of the program. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I would like to talk about both the cult thing and the strike, if I may. First of all, yesterday I tried to get on your show at the last minute, and you sort of cut me off short.
Sorry.
But anyway, I went on. What I wanted to say was, the more you alienate people, and this has something to do with cults as well, the more you alienate people communication-wise, the more you're going to get a breakdown in communication in general. And I think that the government, Barrett, he tries to sell BC Place as his project and tries to, stick his chest out, pound it up, and tell everybody how great he is. I think the basis of our society is the fact that it's the people out there that are doing the little nitty-gritty jobs. It's their blood and guts that support their government. It's their tax money that supports the government.
Well, that's pretty self-evident.
And I think too often politicians abuse it for their own ego and self-interest. I think there's too much of a network and family of corporate buddies going around, patting each other on the back, saying, well, we'll get them today and we'll put money in our banks tomorrow.
Fair enough, your philosophy may be sound, but it's awfully dull.
Well, dull or not, I think people, if they become more aware of, if they would read more between the lines, they wouldn't get caught up in this
That's
mess.
why you should sometimes watch the look in my face when I ask a question. Okay, bye. Philosophers.
Yes, Jack?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you asked earlier for people to phone in that have been affected by the strike.
Yes.
I run a proprietary boarding home. I have 2 clients that live with me. Both young women are mentally handicapped, and it's my job to teach them life skills and hopefully train them to independence so they go back into the community. I am not a member of the BCGEU. This is a private thing I do, but as long as the strike's on, I will not be paid a dime, and yet I am expected to support these 2 ladies in residence totally.
Do you get a monthly check for these 2 women?
Yes, it comes from Victoria.
And have you been told the checks will not be coming out?
That's right. I put my billing in the end of every month, and I bill like retroactive for the month prior.
Can you manage?
If it's a very short strike, yes, but I'm going to panic if it goes over the month. I have enough food and everything behind me to last a month with these 2 people, but since they have special needs, there's just no way I can...
Yeah, I know what you mean.
No.
Well, you're another innocent victim, casualty, and so are the 2 women who have to be taught life skills. Presumably, if the strike were to last a long time, God forbid, they would find a way to computerize your check on a monthly basis like UIC.
Well, I hope so.
Okay, ma'am, best of luck. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I'm just kind of confused on how the government's handling things right now.
You're confused.
Yeah, they say about restraint. Well, how can they expect the small man to accept restraint if they can't themselves? That's what I can't understand. I'm one of the fortunate few who's employed right now.
There's not much point in esoteric arguments about how much they spent and how much they haven't spent. You can go on endlessly about your own level of priorities. This government is in power. This government sets its priorities. This government will bend to public pressure, as I think it's bending at the moment to public pressure.
Yes, sir.
But there's no point in going over the esoterica of a $20 million communication system in the government, which doesn't seem to work.
Yeah.
For a start, but we're stuck with it, and I would suggest to any other political party were it to move in tomorrow would keep the same expensive, incompetent, inefficient apparatus. Right, thank you very much. That's fair enough, and that's a good defensible statement. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, I was one of the callers that just talked to Mr. Bear. I hope you're going to put somebody on your show that knows computers well enough.
I had a guy on, I've had a couple of people on about computers, and they make no sense. I mean, don't forget, you're dealing with an elderly gentleman here.
Doesn't matter. Listen, I'm not... Well, that has nothing to do with it.
His advice was very good indeed. Don't buy a computer. Rent one, lease one, borrow one, unicoin-operated one, and find out if you actually need a computer. I almost bought an Apple, and I know damn fine the Apple would be lying there going rotten.
Well, I'll tell you, Jack, I think a computer is just an extension of, your own...
It's an ego trip.
And no, it's not. Come on, Jack, look.
It's like people that buy big fancy cars.
Jack, you know something? If you can get a little attachment sooner or later that you can just... You say, like you're reading the book, it'll type it out for you. Think of the time that'll save you.
I can read. I don't need a...
Yeah, I know, but no, just for correspondence, right?
Look, I would find it very difficult to write a book because on some days I can barely remember what happened within the past 24 hours unless I'm cooed and prompted by all the little people who run around here with big cards and simple letters. I'll be back after the break. Tomorrow's day 3 of the strike. I'm sure glad it started on the 1st of November. We'd only have to look at the date to know how long it's lasted. That's a joke. Joke. And we'll cover the strike tomorrow morning. Haven't got any option. And then we've got a very bright guy, Julius Sumner Miller, Professor Wonderful, and Roy Gauthier of the Building Trades Council will be here on a serious topic. Webster, 9 a.m. precisely. When will BCGEU people be fired? No, that's no bloody good.
The government's boss man.
The man who wants to be boss, Jim Chabot, on Check at Midnight.